Hello and welcome to our webinar, Work Smarter, Not Harder, Student-Centered Teaching Practices. We're the teacher training team at the English Language Institute at Missouri State University. My name's Jennifer Johnston, and I'm the Teacher Training Programs Director. I've been teaching English as a second and foreign language for over 25 years, and I've been a teacher trainer for the past 5 years. I'm a Cambridge CELTA trainer and do workshops for teachers from all over the world.
Hi, my name's Phil Bridges, and I've been teaching English as a second language for about 15 years and working with a variety of teacher training programs for about 5 years now. I'm also a Cambridge CELTA trainer. It's good to meet you.
Hi everyone, my name is Helen. I'm originally from China. I've been in the US for 14 years. I got my PhD in applied linguistics and master's in TESOL, and I have more than 10 years of teaching experience in EFL, ESL, undergrad and graduate level students.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I've been an ESL, an English teacher, for about 10 years, and about 5 years been working in teacher training. I worked as a K-5 ELL specialist in the public school and as a K-12 English teacher in a foreign language context in Europe. Hi, we are going to dive into some of the theory and background of student-centered teaching before we go into a couple categories of tips of hopefully some things you can use in your classroom starting tomorrow. So we're going to start with just a little bit of self-assessment, some reflection for you as a teacher. Just think really quickly about you and your class and how you normally act. In your class, do you have a tendency to launch into lectures and you want students to keep up? You say raise your hand if you have questions. Or do you prepare your students for learning ahead of time? Do you think about their perspective, think about what they already know and what they need to know? In your class, do all students learn the same thing at the same time? Everybody together? Or do students sometimes have choice about what they read or the subject they're writing about or a timeline for a project? You might be somewhere in the middle. You could be some kind of gradient. And think about your class. Do you like to catch students unaware and keep everybody on their toes? Or do you like for students to really grapple with the learning process and really make mistakes and kind of be messy in their understanding? In your class, do you feel like it's your job to provide all the information and then it's the student's job, it's their employment to learn? Or in your class, are you sometimes unclear and students are comfortable asking you for more information, they're comfortable asking you for help with what to do or what they're learning? So we don't want to say that every practice is about student-centered teaching is the best all the time. But student-centered teaching, things like encouraging the learning process and being aware that you might be misunderstood, thinking about students' perspective, that's really the basis for student-centered teaching, as we'll see. So think about what is student-centered teaching. So here are a couple of the examples. It's a very broad category, but a student-centered teacher will look for unique characteristics in their students that will affect learning, or maybe in their group of students for that year. So you're not just doing the same thing year after year, class after class. You're changing what you teach based on the students in front of you. The student-centered teacher will help students set goals for themselves, really encourage students to take ownership of their learning so that students can be self-directed. And when you do that, when you make students more self-directed, you're really becoming a lot more of a facilitator of learning than of the sole person who has all the knowledge. So you have to give up a little bit of control and understand that students also have something to teach themselves and each other. So all the class time that was spent on you lecturing or students memorizing can also be balanced with metacognition, teaching students how to teach themselves and learn from one another. And in that, students will become aware of their own thought processes, their own metacognition, and they can use their own strengths and weaknesses. So in this kind of classroom, the teacher is more concerned with what the learner is experiencing than with what they are doing in the front of the classroom. So I can be really excited that I have this thing to say, but it doesn't matter if I don't have the students' attention, if I don't have their motivation, if it's not appropriate content or curriculum for them at that time. It doesn't matter if you do the most beautiful lesson. What matters most is are the students prepared to learn it, and what do they comprehend and understand. So you're thinking more from the student's perspective than the teacher's perspective. So what does that look like? Is this important? Does it matter? That might look like, as opposed to this image on the left side of your screen, that the knowledge and experience all come from the teacher. You give all the information and you disseminate directly to the students. It might look like having students build understanding through the knowledge and experience and background that each of them bring. In this way, students will be actually taking ownership of information. They'll be saying, oh, you're saying that, that reminds me of another thing, which I understand to mean this. And the other students will say, oh, I understand it to mean this. And the teacher will say, you're both a little bit right, a little bit wrong. You're building that understanding and knowledge together, which involves significant interaction. That's very important because then the students are really taking ownership and they're creating an understanding, not just receiving. So I know that many teachers might teach in a context or in a school where it's expected that a teacher stands up in front of a class and is speaking a lot, doing a video, doing an activity. But it's okay if students are working independently, or if they're working in groups or in partners and you are monitoring, getting things prepared. That's okay. That's not lazy teaching. If you're not constantly lecturing, you're not a bad teacher. Think about if you are lecturing, and even if you're calling on students, you are engaged, and one student you call on is actively engaged. But if the whole classroom is a little bit noisy or students are sharing with one another, then each student is engaged, 100% engagement, as opposed to 2 out of 30. So it's not laziness, it's an okay way to teach, it's actually a more effective way to teach. Here's an example. Think about these two classrooms. Which one looks more like how you wish your classroom looked? Do you wish the students were sitting in these straight rows, all facing the same direction, paying attention, mouths closed? Or do you like it when students maybe have supplies out, looks like they've been working, they're turning and chatting with each other? Traditionally, we would say this classroom with the students in straight rows looks like a good classroom. Maybe this other classroom looks disruptive or noisy or bad. But all of that depends on what the students are saying and what they're thinking about. Look at this classroom. Maybe this boy is saying, pick me, I know the answer. I knew it before I walked in today, and I can't wait to just show how much I know. Not really learning. This student doesn't understand the topic at all. He doesn't know the main idea or any of the sub ideas. He's quite confused. He just says, what? This student is sleeping with his eyes open. He's just present. He thinks, I'm hungry. Are any of those students actively creating new learning and understanding? Now, what if these students who are chatting over here are saying things like, the best way to solve the problem is, what you're saying is, I think that's a good idea, encouraging each other, building something new together. coming up with new methods and ways to solve problems. Which classroom has better learning going on? Now that we've used the word better, I just want to reinforce there are these aspects of teacher-centered instruction and student-centered instruction where the teacher-centered instruction is a little more orderly. The teacher has controls to make sure that each student hears about each topic. Students are all there together, so you kind of can guide them much more closely. But if they're not paying attention, then they're still going to miss something. Whereas on the student-centered side, students are talking, it could be busy, it could be self-directed. They might have more interest or motivation if they're able to participate, but teachers must manage many activities at once. They might have students at different stages of a project or on different concepts. So the idea is that really you should use both. You should not be fully teacher-centered, but there are times when you will have to create a quiet classroom, get all eyes on you, and teach something and stand in front of the class. Particularly, many of us are language teachers. You have to teach some vocabulary input sometimes. You have to teach the learning a new tense, introducing what that is with a timeline. It was a little difficult for some concepts to be self-discovered on their own, even with good resources. So there are times to use both. There are times to lecture and to make sure all students understand, make sure all students are getting that information at the same time. And there is plenty of time where students should be taking the information that you lectured about and creating information on their own. So you can use both. A little more background, one of the founders of the field of language acquisition, Stephen Krashen, he talks about the affective barriers, the emotional barriers to language acquisition. And so he posits that language is acquired when students are motivated, when they feel low anxiety, and when they have their self-esteem protected. So he even says that there's no filter for naturally acquiring language if you're protecting the students in this way. They're motivated and they have low anxiety, provided that the input is comprehensible. So we're going to talk a little bit more about comprehensible input here in a little bit. And we're also going to think about what ways can we motivate students and lower their anxiety, things that are simple. Because one thing we want to consider is that student-centered teaching doesn't always have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be completely redoing your classroom. I bet you can even now think about some simple things you might be able to do to lower student anxiety so that their brain is more ready to acquire language. Again, all of these are considering the student's perspective more than the teacher's actions. Also, going into, if you do want to create a very student-centered classroom and you feel motivated, how can I change? How can I have a system or a framework? You don't have to create a framework from scratch. You don't have to make all your own materials or your own concepts. There are so many student-centered frameworks that already exist. So use what has already been created. Here are lots of resources and concepts you could dive into to find out how to make your classroom more student-centered. There are books and curriculums you can purchase, or even just free online resources, and a free online webinars as well about many of these topics, including inquiry learning, which includes PBL, Socratic seminars, cooperative learning. It's an official training you can get, or you can learn about intentional teaming. Brain-based learning is very positive, using neuroscience about how students' brains learn best, which also touches a lot on gamification, which you'll hear about later today. Maybe flipped classrooms, using technology if you have it, for a framework called must-dos and may-dos. Please take some time to dive into these concepts so you can see what's already been made and how you can create a student-centered classroom for yourself.
Guided discovery is another great way to get students more involved and engaged in class. It's a really great student-centered technique. Some people call guided discovery an inductive approach. So this is when you give students some examples of language. For example, if you want to do a grammar task, you might give them examples of the grammar used in a context, maybe in sentences or in a paragraph. And then you ask them questions to help them discover the grammar rule. Here's a quick example of what that can look like. This would be in a low-level class, maybe a beginner level class. So you might show students these sentences and ask them some questions, either orally or make a small task for them to do with partners. So you might ask them some questions like, what are the white words? What kind of words are the white words? What kind of words are the blue words? What kind of words are the yellow words? And then from there, you might ask them, why do some of the blue words have an S at the end and some don't? Or so that they can notice that there are some differences in those verbs, right? Or you could even have it written out more like a mathematical equation for them to fill in, such as I plus blank. So here they would have to write like, and then we plus blank, he or she or Julian Ben plus blank. And then you could have a rule for them to fill in. For example, with I, we, they, we use like, but with he, she, it, we use likes. So instead of you, the teacher, telling the rule, the students can figure out the rule by just looking at examples and talking together about the rule. So why can guided discovery be useful? So the first one is it makes the students do the work. If you take just a couple of minutes to set up that task, then the students are actually doing the work of figuring out the grammar rule themselves. And so this actually helps students remember better when they're involved in figuring the rule out. You can probably remember back to classes you've had where the teacher has just told you rules. You don't remember as well. But if you were involved in figuring the pattern out, then you actually remember that rule better. And finally, it's more engaging. It's like solving a puzzle. So again, instead of the teacher just telling students, like, if we have a I, it's like, we like, they like, he, she likes. Repeat after me. This is much more engaging, right? Students get to try to solve that puzzle and figure out the rule. So it's more interesting for them. And while they're doing that, the teacher is just walking around and monitoring and noticing what the students are doing. So that makes it easier for the teacher.
Now that we've learned a little bit about guided discovery, we can go back and talk some about what is comprehensible input. In the quote from Stephen Krashen, he said that once the affective barriers are lowered, the only thing that students need is comprehensible input in order to acquire language. So this is a similar or the same really semantical concept of receptive scaffolding. So if English is learned in 4 skills, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, 2 of those skills are receptive and 2 are productive. So we have the receptive skills, listening and reading, and that is the input. So this is about how to scaffold the receptive skills or create comprehensible input. Input would be what students read and what they hear. So what does that mean for you as the teacher? That's what you say, the directions you give, and anything you say in class, and the text that students read. So comprehensible. If you look into the research, they define comprehensible as the linguistic and cognitive level that's appropriate for the students. So if a student is a new language learner, new English learner, they need a lower linguistical level, like reduced complexity in grammar, more common vocabulary, that kind of textual or spoken simplicity, and then a more complex level, of course, going up with proficiency. For cognitive, this has to do not just with the potential of a cognitive disability, but also age. Students at a certain development level are cognitively ready for more abstract or more concrete concepts. So comprehensible input should be at the proficiency that's appropriate for your students and the developmental age that's appropriate for your students. We could run into some issues here when we have students that are older and have a lower English proficiency. We have to be careful not to also lower the cognitive level too low or too high for students. So how do you know these things? Part of being student-centered in the way that you teach is knowing your individual students and the levels that they're at. So that would include diagnostic testing, using information from previous teachers or previous school years, so that you can know what is the linguistic level of the entirety of my class. How many students do I have on each level? What's the variation between them? Is there some cognitive or maturity issues where some students are more prepared than others? All of that will help you be sure that your input is comprehensible. So there are many small things you can do to make what you say and what you give to read more variable for students at different levels. But let's talk quickly about what you say. For that though, just an illustration that when you add incomprehensible language and you don't support, the demand of the task is actually significantly larger than what the teacher thinks they're giving. If you give students a handout and they don't understand what to do, or they don't understand how they're going to find the right answers, they don't understand the concepts, and they have no ways to ask for help, then you're actually giving them an impossible task, completely impossible. The demand grows. If you keep the language comprehensible and the support there if they need it, then you're actually assigning the task you think you're assigning. Considering the student's perspective once again. So let's go back and talk about giving clear instructions about what we say when we're teaching. Instructions and directions are so important. So think about these directions. Listen to what I say. I get up in front of my students and I say, okay, so what I would like you to do now is to get together with your person next to you. So perhaps make threes. And then what I need you to do is to ask the questions to each other and then answer them. It's speaking, which means you need to speak, but you don't need to write. Do you feel confident? Do you know what to do? What's another way you could say that? I would consider saying something very simple and straightforward. Maybe something like, you will ask questions with your partner, or even more simple grammar, ask a question to your partner, and then show them, group together, group together, group together. No language, just showing. And then you could ask the students clarifying questions, which will be talked about in Check for Understanding. But you can ask them, will you speak or will you write? You will speak. Will you both speak or one speak? Both will speak. So that looks like, hi, ask some questions to your partner. Will you speak or will you write? Will you both speak? Yes, both will speak. So much more simple. Let's see one more quick example. There are some sentences, and what I would like you to do with them is have a look at them and decide if you think that they are the right or they're wrong. I mean, not correct. And think about them with the person next to you, and also change them to make them correct if you think there's something wrong. Go ahead, please begin. It could be quite unclear. So much extra language. So you could give short directions. Decide if these sentences are good or bad. If they are bad, make them correct. Much more clear. I just need to do this and do this. So really consider the directions you're giving. Some other really quick tips about giving directions or using your speech in a very comprehensible and clear way. You should make directions clear, as we just practiced. Really, it's easiest if you write directions out on the board or have them written on assignments so students can reference those if they miss some words. Make sure the desired action is obvious. Emphasize the action. Decide if the sentences are good. If they're bad, make them correct. Correct them. Their actions are really emphasized. Make sure you're not shouting over other noises like classmates or announcements. This can make language completely incomprehensible, just wasting your breath. If you're doing something in a student's language, that's a language they're still comprehending, still learning, and you use idioms or jokes or sarcasm, you might think you're being funny, but the students at low proficiency or lower cognitive levels are not prepared for that kind of language. So those idioms or jokes or sarcasms, they should be avoided or explained really thoroughly so it's clear what you're meaning. Of course, using lots of visual support, including images, icons, putting icons if you're able to list some mental images that can help ideas stick, bringing in real life objects. All of this is more important than what you say, what you show the students. The number one rule for comprehension is modeling. Show, go ahead and show instead of tell. Show the students, I'm going to put my paper over here by putting your paper over there. Demonstrate work, show examples of projects, so examples of finished product. All of this will save you words and save you time saying something out that students don't understand. Finally, you can spend some time to make sure that the main topic and then what's a subtopic is very clear in your class, whether that's in the way that you give notes, the way that you show on your PowerPoint, the way you use a graphic organizer. There are many, many options, but make it clear what's the main topic of the learning and how do these ideas fit together. Make it visually obvious in whatever method you're using for teaching. There are so many other ideas we could get into, but we'll save them for another time.
Now I'd like to talk about some ways to check if our students understand what we're teaching, but in more student-centered ways. So first, I want to point out some things to avoid that we teachers can do that can really make things teacher-centered or can create situations where we don't really know if our students understand or not. So the first thing to watch out for is don't assume that our students understand something. In our lessons, we have these important concepts, we have things our students need to know. And as teachers, we want to make sure that we're doing things to check that they're understanding instead of just assuming. But to do this, we don't want to just ask a simple question, do you understand? Or does that make sense? Everybody got it? We use these things and students may answer, but we don't really learn anything if they say yes or no. We don't know if, maybe they say no, but they really did understand what we want them to know, or maybe they say yes and they didn't. So those questions don't give us very good information. Another thing we tend to do as teachers that can make a class very teacher-centered is just repeat ourselves, even if there's no good purpose for doing so. Or we can explain something just forever and ever. And if our students aren't getting anything of that, that's not necessarily helping them understand or checking that they understand, it just becomes more teacher talk. So instead, there are a few things to consider. And the first one is just to make sure that in your teaching and in your class, there are regular checks that students are understanding the most important concepts. So if you step back and look at a whole course, this could be regular assessment, even if it's not graded, to check that students are understanding, to give them a chance to demonstrate that they have got those concepts. Within a class, this could be using questions in a way to check if students are understanding. And this isn't just asking, hey, does anyone have any questions? Or, hey, do you understand? Instead, we're asking questions that specifically target what the students need to know. Other things we can do, instead of just repeating the same information in the same way, we can recycle concepts and content, and we can review. So by recycling, I mean, if we teach some vocabulary words or we introduce some information, then maybe later on in the lesson or in the next lesson, instead of introducing new content and new information, we're using that information from yesterday. So if they read an article in yesterday's class, then maybe if you do a grammar lesson, look through that article and see if you can pull a few sentences from that to use as models in your grammar lesson. So with that, the students already have a comfort level with the material because it's popping up again and again. And this helps with memory. It helps with keeping the things they're learning in their eyes, so they can remember it and keep working on it. Same thing with reviewing. It gives students a chance to connect to what they've already learned as they are moving through the class. So don't just repeat yourself, but recycle content and review things. And finally, just be sure that in your classroom, you make room for students to ask questions and also to teach others. If students are able to teach content to another student, that's a good demonstration that they understand. Or if they don't understand, if you make a space where they're able, maybe you set them a task and say, okay, everyone get into a group, and with your group, I want you to write me 2 questions about today's lesson, things that you don't understand very well. Giving them that specific task is better than just getting to the end of the lesson and saying any questions. Because with one, they will want to complete the task to make you happy. But if you say any questions, then students may not want to answer and may not want to ask questions because they think, oh, they'll be unhappy if, it will look like I don't understand, or maybe it will look like they didn't teach very well. So make sure that you make some space for questions. Okay. And then finally, let's kind of look at an example of this. So if we had, just future here with be going to. So when we're talking about asking those kinds of questions to see if students understand, if we have, I'm going to go to the store, I could just say, okay, everyone, I'm going to go to the store. Does everyone understand? Or what does that sentence mean? You got it? Okay. That would not give me a very good information and is not very student-centered. So instead, we could ask specific questions that are more targeted to the most important parts of meaning. So for example, I could ask, okay, look at this sentence. When I go, is that now or is it in the future? They would need to say, oh, it's in the future. If they say it's now, then maybe they're confusing be going to for the future with like present progressive. And then I could ask, is this a plan about what's going to happen in the future, or is this a guess about what is going to happen in the future? And they would need to say, okay, this is a plan. So if they can answer both those questions, then they really understand. So I'm not just assuming my students are following me, I'm really taking the time to check. We can also give them small tasks. So I could give them a timeline and have them put this sentence on the timeline. If they put it in the future, then they're demonstrating understanding. Or I could have them give me another example using that tense, or use be going to talk about future plans. And if they can do that, then they're applying what they've learned. They're demonstrating that they really do understand. All right.
Next, we're gonna talk about raising students' motivation as an important part for student-centered pedagogy. We all know that students' engagement is important because through actually working with the task, they can learn the most. And one effective way is through games. So today, we're gonna share one example game to see how that could be easily done. The game that I'm sharing today is called Game of Lies, Grill the Teacher. Okay. This game fits all levels of students, and the aims include improving students' speaking skills, for example, their oral grammar and pragmatic competence. The class time only requires about 20 to 30 minutes, and as a teacher, 10 minutes preparation time will be enough. And this game is free. That sounds good, right? Okay, so the game gives students the opportunity to listen to claims by the teacher, and students use question forms to determine which statements are true and which are lies. Some students may have difficulty with question forms, so the opportunity to do so in a fun way can help them to develop skills necessary to grill and catch the teacher in a lie. And for more proficient students, they can learn about pragmatic competence and awareness related to asking personal questions. So before the game, the teacher will review question forms with students, including past perfect tense or simple past tense. And the review can also include WH question form and a yes/no question form. Before the class, the teacher needs to come up with 10 statements. 5 are true statements and 5 are lies. Here are some examples I prepared. Okay. During the game, you can write or display these 10 statements on the board or screen, and then read the statements to your students. Okay. And then break the students into small groups, usually 3 to 5 students per group, depending on your class size. Each group has 7 to 10 minutes to come up with some grilling questions. They use question forms. For example, they may want to ask about why and when you're on TV. Here are some examples. Why are you on TV? When were you on TV? What was the name of the program? Okay. So the groups can ask about any of the claims and ask as many questions as they can in the allotted time. Okay. The groups then have 5 minutes to determine which claims are true and which are lies. The teacher could put a chart on the board, which is shown in the slide here. Okay. So you can take the tally of the results. The group with the most correct answers is the winner. So the game sounds very simple. It's simple because it's based on a very famous game that we are all familiar with, which is called Two Truths and a Lie. So through this example, I just want to share my personal experience about using games as a student-centered teaching method, which is it's not very time-consuming or hard to prepare games. We can just expand or change the simple games that we are familiar with and are comfortable to play and share with our students. Okay, for this specific game, we can make it a more student-centered version. So students can write their own true and false statements instead of teacher preparing the statements. And then in groups, other students will ask about them. Sorry about this. Okay, and this game can also be played online. For example, on the Kahoot or Poll Everywhere website. Okay, so hopefully this game I shared today will give you some ideas how to insert simple free games into class teaching. And there are also some paid games online. Actually, I got this game idea from this book. And if you're interested in it, I can share more details about this book about teaching with games, new ways in teaching with games. That's all I want to share today about playing games. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed learning with us today. We have so much more to teach you, as Jennifer will talk about here in a moment, but I just want to summarize some of the ideas that we've talked about. Overall, we just want you to have the message that student-centered instruction doesn't have to be scary or difficult. It doesn't have to be chaotic or so demanding of your time as maybe if you imagined. You don't have to invent a whole new curriculum, and it doesn't have to be something that's boring for you as the teacher or for the students. So we really invite you to give some of these simple practices a try. Start with what you can do, and then build up each class, each semester, each year until you have a fully student-centered classroom. If you have any more questions about how we could help you with student-centered teaching practices or any of the other topics that we've presented about as the ELI teacher training team, we invite you to use this Padlet, an interactive website where you can leave comments. You can leave us comments, questions about anything that we've said for any of us, any ideas about how we can further help you as a teacher with student-centered instruction or with other topics that you would like to hear about. And you can interact with other viewers. So if you log on and see some questions posted that you also have the answer to, feel free to interact and comment on each other's posts. We'll reply as a team to all the questions that are posted in this next month. And after that, we will be able to interact, but perhaps sporadically. So feel free to scan the QR code, or there's a little bit longer URL here you can type in, but we would love to hear from you and to interact with you further.
So if you're interested in learning more about student-centered teaching, we're going to be offering a course in the spring called the Student-Centered Classroom. We will be talking much more about the concepts and activities and techniques that we talked about in the webinar today. And we'll be going into much greater depth into those, and also we'll be introducing many other ideas, activities that you can use, and teaching techniques. The date for the course will be March 29th to April 28th next year, 2022. And we have two options for the time. One, it will be 10 to 11:15 a.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays. And the second will be from 6 to 7:15 p.m. Mondays and Wednesdays. Those are all in US Central Time, so you'll want to double check what time that is in your local time zone. I'll give you the link to register on the next slide. Finally, we also invite you to join our ELI In Touch membership program for teachers. This program allows you to join many great activities and receive a lot of useful information for teachers. So some of the benefits of the program are a weekly newsletter written by our teacher training team that you met in today's webinar. We include teaching tips, resource reviews, highlights of different programs, teacher spotlights, a lot of great information, and that's a weekly newsletter. We also have Ask Me Anything days where we'll get on live and we'll let you come and ask any kind of question you want to ask about English or about teaching. You'll also have access to more free webinars and conversation circles, which is an opportunity for anyone who wants to practice their English with other teachers or students, along with people from our local community here in Springfield, Missouri. If you're interested in more information about that, or you'd like to register for the class that I just told you about, you can go to MissouriStateUniversity.wildapricot.org. Thank you so much for attending, for watching our webinar today. And again, we invite you to submit any questions you have to the Padlet, and we look forward to answering those for you. Thank you. Finally, our contact information. If you do have more questions, you can email us at eliteachertraining@missouristate.edu.